Hello everybody, this is Digihito1. Welcome to the conclusion of my 9 hours, 9 persons, 9 doors let's play. This is part 2 of the final set of bonus episodes, and I'm so excited to be finally sharing this one with you guys. But before we get into it, I would like to share with you a couple of disclaimers, because this is a video that I was meaning to upload like way earlier, like I'm talking months ago. Initially I wanted this to be sort of like a compilation of some of my initial thoughts and takes on the plot and the characters of the game, but then as I started editing this video and other personal life responsibilities, work and other stuff came up, this was actually like a challenge to edit. I would keep coming back to this video, and there were parts of it that I wasn't really proud of. There were other parts that I thought I could have developed way better. Essentially, that's the reason why this video is being uploaded at such a late date. And so this video is less about my initial thoughts and impressions after beating the game, and more about some of the thoughts and conclusions that I have been able to draw after, thinking about this game for quite a while now. So with that in mind, let's jump right into it now. So let's begin by discussing the plot a little bit, because coming into 999, I think some of my initial expectations were like sort of informed by the genre, the mystery visual novel and stuff. I was thinking of games like Danganronpa. I was thinking of maybe a little bit of Ace Attorney as well, because I don't know, maybe something about the character designs initially like made me think Ace Attorney. I really didn't know what I was in for. I thought there was gonna be like a larger importance placed on the concept of making moral choices and having to make difficult choices in this situation. Like, as soon as the game was like, oh, you're gonna be split up in groups, I was like, all right. My initial thoughts were, we're gonna have to spend time with different people in different runs of the game, and that's gonna probably gonna inform your choices on who gets to stay behind and who gets to progress. And there really weren't many moments where this is the case, which I thought was interesting, because leading up to the different endings, at no point do you, the player, or Junpei as an extension of you, know what's gonna happen next. And I think this is pretty well encapsulated by the fact that I got safe ending on my first try, and I had no idea what I was in for. I didn't know all of those crazy revelations and events were gonna happen. I was just choosing doors. I was just going with my gut on what I wanted to do, and it's so interesting how the game builds up this kind of theme of like, things are happening and you're not in control of those things. You're just like witnessing them. You are simply going along with the plot. And as a first-time player, I think that's what makes this the fresh experience of this game so memorable and so easy to connect to a character like Junpei, who is in the exact same predicament as you are. It really is like a very interesting experience. Now, in terms of nitpicks, there are obviously like a couple of things to mention. It's not a perfect game by any means. I don't think any game is like a perfect cohesive experience. 999 sometimes has some bits of humor that don't really land with me, though that's more related to my personal taste. In terms of the story, more glaringly, however, there are a couple of plot points, or well, sometimes they are more like contrivances, I would say, or just like convenient things that happen. But I would say that even if those particular things don't really hold up to scrutiny, to me, they don't ruin like the overall experience. Like, sure, I'm the kind of person who likes looking at the plot in detail and I like picking apart these things, but at the end of the day, considering the emotional experience that this game provides, the fact that the characters are so well written and integrated into the plot of the story, and that at the end of the day, it's about like the overall experience that you're getting from this. I would say that it doesn't bother me at all if there are a couple of things that don't really work, because as I said, the characters are stellar. You get to connect with them so much. The plot, the story, very high emotional stakes, especially near the end. The atmosphere, the vibe throughout the whole game, immaculate. And I say those things are what are gonna stay with me for a very long time. So with those thoughts out of the way, I would now like to take a closer look at the characters themselves. We're not done talking about the themes of the story. I just thought that for the sake of clarity and organizing my thoughts a bit better, I figured I might talk about them as we get to each character and discussing the reasons why I like them, why I think their role in the story works. And since I was gonna give my opinion on them anyway, I decided we might also go with a tier list format. So I prepared this little tier list here. I'm gonna put it on the screen. There we go. And I'm gonna be talking about each of these tiers, starting from the bottom and going up. The characters within each tier are also gonna be ordered in order of preference. So yeah, let's do this. And at number 9, we have the man. The man with the 9. Look, it's the 9th man, okay? But also I feel like if we're gonna be talking about Mr. X and Captain, this is the place to do it as well. Because hopefully the name of the tier is self-explanatory, right? And these three kind of go together in that sense. They fulfill similar roles in the story. There's not enough about them to kind of justify ranking them any higher and stuff. But I will say, sometimes your story is just gonna need characters like this that just exist to further the plot. And as far as these three go, I think that the way that they're executed is pretty good, pun intended. So you have Kubota, for example, whose death right out of the gate immediately sets up like the stakes and the tone that you can expect for the rest of the game. Then there's Nijisaki, whose death and like the whole body swap plot with Snake is one of the central mysteries of the game, and similar to Musashiro as well, whose death is also like a mystery, more so related to Zero's presence and potential role in the story. So yeah, if nothing else, they're memorable because of this. They're also memorable through their connection to Hongo, which I think like it's quite interesting. And yeah, not much else to say, but I think they're pretty serviceable. Same goes for the character design, though I will say Kubota's design has like a lot of appeal. And by appeal, I mean, you know, not necessarily a character being like conventionally attractive or pleasant to look at. It's more so related to the way that the shape language and inspirations for a design or color palette fit the character. I feel like that works pretty well with all of these. You also have Musashiro, who's like wearing the captain's suit, and Junpei even makes a point of mentioning it, like, oh, I think they're just playing with us, like making it too obvious. And of course, Nijisaki like wearing Snake's clothes during the game as part of the body swap, and in terms of his design, like having a similar build as Snake. So it all comes together pretty nicely. So yeah, there you go. Serviceable characters for the role that they are supposed to fulfill in the story. Let's move on to the rest. Okay, now I need you to imagine there's a huge gap between this tier we've just discussed and the next one. You got it? Are you visualizing it? Okay, well now make it about 10 times bigger, and that's essentially how much of a difference there is between these guys and the characters I'm gonna be discussing next. Because now we are in real territory character. Now these people have personality and like a presence in the story, and they are incredible and they get better and better the higher we go up. But unfortunately, that means that somebody's gotta be at the bottom. Like it works like that. So if they're here, it doesn't mean that they're a bad character. Okay, it's just a testament to how insanely solid the cast is. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the next character, which is Seven. And again, this is what I mean. Seven being here is not an indication that I don't like him. That's not true. I love him. I really enjoy his character. But unfortunately, the baseline level of enjoyment for like every single character from now on is so high that somebody's gotta be at the bottom. And unfortunately, that means that I gotta be a little bit of a nitpicker. So having said that, let's start with a little bit of a discussion of the negatives first. That way we can end up on a positive note and it doesn't feel like I'm being too tough on the big guy. So one of the main issues to me regarding Seven is the fact that his personality and his writing sometimes feels a little bit inconsistent, mostly to do with the humor, the kind of jokes that they wrote for him. I really don't like them. I don't think we needed another character that's, saying kind of out-of-pocket things to Lotus and Clover. We already had Junpei, and we already had Santa for those roles. So when Seven also joins in, it just makes it like a little bit too icky for me sometimes. And it's a shame because in terms of his character, I don't necessarily think this is reflective of the kind of person he is. Now, I'm not saying he should be perfect. Of course, no character should be. I'm just saying that in terms of flaws, perhaps there are other avenues that they could have deepened or explored. For example, I feel like something like leaning into his bad temper or like short fuse could have been like a much better way to do so. Or perhaps even like explore a little bit how his eagerness to like do some vigilante justice could have led him to jump to conclusions that perhaps are not fair. Something like that I feel like would have been a little bit more interesting and less, awkward, I guess. That aside, Seven is great. There are so many traits that are likable and enjoyable. He's so heroic, he's dependable, he plays like such an active role in the backstory with the kids in the Gigantic and stuff, and that's not even taking into account the assistant or helper Seven theory. I'm not even gonna get into it. It's just something that adds like an extra layer if you're the kind of person who likes rotating characters in their head as I am. His design is also great. I would say the only thing I don't really like are his lips. I don't think Seven is meant to be like any kind of caricature for anything, but there are definitely better ways to like stylize somebody with full lips. Other than that though, the kind of outfit he's wearing immediately like throws you off. You expect him to be some sort of dock worker or something like that. It goes very well with his character, the amnesia plot and everything. And then his design, in a way, also kind of subverts the typical trope of like the big burly guy being like kind of like the dumb meathead. He's all but. Seven is like one of the smartest and most capable people on this ship, and I will die on that hill. And going off of that, lastly, I would like to mention how I think this is something that I mentioned in my playthrough, but I think Seven has one of the best character voices in the game. By which I mean, the kind of things that you're supposed to get from a character's background and so on, from the way they speak. There are several instances in the game where his role as a detective is like foreshadowed, and not only the things he said, like for example referring to like potential killers as the perps and stuff, it's also just like the way he thinks and the way he moves around the ship, letting some of the doors unlocked in case he needs to go back and investigate. All of these things are so well integrated into the character he's supposed to be, and yeah, I have so much praise for how all of these characteristics were woven into his character. It's great stuff. I just wish there was more of that and less of the aspects that make me roll my eyes a little bit. But yeah, Seven is very good. And next up is Lotus. And again, her being here doesn't mean that I don't like her or that I think she's a bad character. Nothing of the sort. I really like her. I enjoy her thoroughly. And I just feel like it's justified to put her here in this tier compared to like the way the characters that we will discuss after were executed. because the thing about Lotus is that I don't really have any problem with her in terms of likability or her writing. It's more to do with the way she was implemented into the story as a character, as a moving part of the plot, where I feel like her presence and role is a little bit weaker and less explored than other characters that I will be ranking above her. So it's really the main reason why I can't really justify placing her higher, even though her personality I greatly and thoroughly enjoy. But yeah, she definitely got the short end of the stick, and this is through no fault of her own. But in terms of her design, doesn't really say much about who she is as a person, or I think Uchikoshi said something about how she was getting ready to go to a dance lesson or whatever, and like, okay, sure. You can have fan service characters, like that's not the problem. But I feel like in terms of like inspirations and design elements, other designs have more interesting stuff going on for them. Yeah, it's also kind of upsetting how a character so strong as she is kind of gets the damsel in distress treatment like a bit too often in this game. Again, this is not her fault, and I don't dislike her for it. I just feel like I wish this were done differently. But unfortunately, she has the 8 bracelet in a game where Mr. Troublemaker numero uno is looking for her. So yeah, it really is a shame. She was done dirty in like so many different aspects, but they more than make up for it with her writing. Like, this is the opposite problem that I have with 7, right? I very much enjoy her personality and the way that she conducts herself throughout the game. I truly think she's the most realistic character in the group, in terms of how she reacts to the situation that we find ourselves in, with the added layer of her being one of the few people who really has no idea what's going on, like none at all. And then I don't think I could blame her, like realistically blame her, for the kind of, manipulations and callousness that she displays at some points in the game, because I can empathize with her. She has family that she needs to go back to, and it's a numbers game. We have been kidnapped by a group of people or somebody who's like crazy and has threatened our lives, and I think honestly she's reacting like rationally, and even if that means that she needs to be like a little bit tough. But yeah, I don't know, man. I just like it when female characters get to be mean, but she's not even mean. Honestly, you guys, she should have been meaner, and you can go argue with a wall. I will forever defend Lotus. And then, yeah, there's also the stuff with her, the emotional stakes that she has, the connection that she has to the game being through the trauma that her own daughters experienced, and she has been investigating and never been able to uncover. And it's kind of bittersweet that this is how she will finally like learn the truth that she's been looking for. It's a shame that the game doesn't make a bigger point of centering this in true ending, because we kind of get to see her getting closure in Submarine Ending, but then she dies like 10 minutes later. So see, this is kind of what I mean when I say that she was done a little bit dirty. I love Lotus. I wish that there could have been more and a bit better executed, but yeah, she's fantastic, she's funny, she's everything, and I love her. Coming up on the next tier in the tier list, and I should introduce this next set of characters by saying that this tier is probably the one that I had the most trouble ranking. Because, for the characters at the very top, I feel like my opinion on them is much more solid, whereas for these, I feel like it might change on a whim depending on the time of day. Because now we're on the territory where I no longer have bigger underlying issues with the characters, and I'm just here to enjoy what they contribute to the plot, to the story, and in my personal enjoyment of them. So with that in mind, the next character we have to discuss is Junpei. And Junpei is such an interesting character to me, both because of his personality, but also because of his writing, his role in the story as a protagonist. Because he definitely fits the bill on a first impression, as soon as you see him, he definitely conveys that he's supposed to be everything you think the main protagonist of a visual novel is supposed to be. He gives the impression that he's kind of like the everyman, the character that the intended target audience for this game is supposed to project onto and find relatable. And even his design conveys this. He's got kind of like the average look of like, you know, short brown hair, brown eyes. But then, as the game progresses, more and more of his personality shines through as you gain a deeper understanding of who he is as a character. And that's when you start realizing that he's anything but generic. He's definitely got a lot of standout qualities. He's funny, definitely providing some of the best comic relief in the game. Sometimes can be a bit of a pervert, but not in a way that I think overstays its welcome. But beyond those traits, some of his positive qualities are like very good and very strong stuff. Like, he's such a smart character in a way that, you know, may not seem the case at first. You know, usually the way it goes with like visual novel protagonists is that they are supposed to be sort of an audience surrogate. So by virtue of that, they're not going to be knowledgeable in a lot of the things that the other characters are going to be talking about, mostly so that they can serve as a vessel for exposition. And this is definitely the case for Junpei. You know, there are a lot of different topics that the other characters bring up that he's going to be learning about over the course of the game, but his intellectual curiosity is definitely there. And in fact, in some of those info dumps, he definitely already has a little bit of background knowledge. Like, for example, the fact that you can say that Junpei already knew that the sinking of the Titanic had been predicted and stuff, something like that comes to mind when I think that Junpei is definitely a character who's not like completely clueless about everything. And even the things that he doesn't know, he internalizes and he's able to like connect them so quickly to the other characters and events that are happening. He's the one that puts together like the entire climax of Safe Ending, you know, solving the mystery of the death of quote-unquote Snake and Clover and stuff. And that takes a lot of brains. Junpei is definitely like so smart. Another fantastic quality of Junpei's is his heart. You know, just the empathy that he has for like the other characters around him. The way that some of the descriptions when he learns about, you know, the quote-unquote girl who died, or his reaction to some of the deaths of the other players, definitely show that he's a guy that cares a lot. And it's both of those things, his smarts and his heart combined, that I think are at the core of his character. There is a lot of ludonarrative integration between Junpei and the player, which allows us to project onto him. And by virtue of projecting onto a character who exhibits these positive traits, I feel like the player also connects with the characters and the events in this way. So that's just great writing. Similarly to how Junpei's personality kind of comes through as you learn more about him, I feel like his character design also does a great job of conveying this, because whereas his physical traits are more on the generic side, as mentioned before, his style choices, like, you know, his fashion is anything but. And it's so interesting because I think I read somewhere that he's partially inspired by Marty McFly from Back to the Future, and if that's the case, then that just makes me love him a little bit more. But even beyond the reference, just the fact that his color palette is mainly composed of blue and red is such an inspired choice and a great way to foreshadow his connection to morphogenetic fields and the role that he would come to play later in True Ending, when his abilities as a receiver and a transmitter are finally awakened and he can finally use them to save Akane. So yeah, when you combine all of these things together, you get, as a result, a very unique and interesting main character whose relationship to the concept of agency is also interesting, because this is something that we were discussing earlier. The choices that you are making are not necessarily what determine the outcomes, or at least not that you can see or intuit at first glance. So that puts him and you kind of like in the same situation. And there's something else that joins you as well, that being the power of knowledge, because at the end of the day, that's essentially what's gonna give you the best outcome in the end. So yeah, Junpei is great. Now, for the next entry in the tier list, we have a tie, which I know is probably defeating the point of the tier list, but honestly, if two characters are gonna be tied, I'm glad it's these two, because when it comes to Clover and Snake, I found it so difficult to make up my mind. I think honestly it depends on the time of day when you ask me which one of the two is my favorite. And the reason for that is that when you take all the aspects that make up a character, there are some where I have a clearer preference for how they were executed with Clover, and then some others where I have a preference for Snake. And so at the end of the day, when you consider all of them together, I still couldn't tell you which one of the two has the edge over the other. So for this section, I'm kind of going to be talking about both of them sort of comparatively, sort of so you can see what I'm talking about. Let's get one of the most straightforward ones out of the way first and discuss character design. Now, this point is not particularly like ever gonna be super decisive when it comes to judging the quality or my enjoyment of a character, but it's always a nice cherry on top, and especially when aspects of the character design are tied to the character itself in ways I can appreciate. In Snake's case, his design is fine, honestly, it's serviceable, but I definitely wouldn't say it's one of the standout designs in the game for me. I will say, however, if nothing else, it's memorable because of its involvement in the Door 3 body swap murder, and of course I need to mention that Snake also gets a change of clothes over the course of the game, so that's fun as well. But other than that, it's not one of those designs that says a lot about the character to me, kind of similar to what I was discussing when I talked about Lotus, and it's a shame. And then you compare it to someone like Clover, and immediately her silhouette instantly recognizable. The visual language and the influences that her design are pulling from, much more indicative of what her personality is like and what you can expect her to be as a person. In her case, it's drawing from the Gyaru and Kogal subcultures, which I'm by no means an expert on, but as far as I'm aware, are kind of like a subversion on the traditional expectations of femininity. And so this immediately tells me that there are aspects of Clover's character that you're gonna judge at a first glance, and you're probably gonna be wrong. And I do think that this is the case, because think about the Clover that you meet at the beginning of the game. Everything about her, including her design, is meant to convey that she's this bubbly young girl who even gets to have a bit of a damsel in distress moment, but it's fine. As long as she has her brother by her side, it doesn't matter that an unstable man is pointing a knife at her. And then Snake disappears, and everything you knew about Clover is about to take a turn, and thus the expectations are subverted. I find the middle portion of the story so interesting because of how Clover pretty much becomes the main emotional driving force after Snake goes missing. So she's a character that's at the forefront of the player's mind, or at least she was in mine. You know, at the end of the day, this video is about my personal opinions. So it's like you're paying a lot of attention to every action and reaction and feeling that she's expressing, and even more so on a first playthrough because it's very likely that you're choosing either doors 7 or 8. So you're kind of like forced to spend time with her. And then after you discover Snake's body, then she's allowed to like feel this deep grief, and you feel a lot for her. And it kind of sucks to say this because she's honestly going through such a bad time, but I really enjoy what they do with Clover in this portion of the game. On the flip side of this, however, is that if I think that Clover really stood out to me because of her presence in the story, then it's also fair to say that Snake really is a masterclass on how to write a character who's defined by his absence. You know, he misses out on opportunities to develop like Clover does, but it's not exactly like he needs to. He's a character who's like pretty well defined from the beginning, and the chances that he gets to be on the spotlight, he utilizes them to such an extent that by the time he's missing, and of course getting wrapped up in the whole mystery and stuff, you're still thinking about him. In a way, it's sort of like he's haunting the narrative, definitely haunting Clover's narrative, and I really appreciate that about him. On the whole, I think I would say that I have a slight preference to how Clover was executed as a character, just as a matter of personal preference. I simply prefer characters who have a bit more of an active role in the story and a little bit of a more dynamic arc, but in terms of personal likability, I think I gravitate a bit more towards Snake here. I just find him more relatable, I think, to the kind of personality that I vibe with, and his role as an older sibling to a younger sibling who is like more of a social butterfly, I would say. But it's also due to, in no small part, to his stellar role in Safe Ending. And look, I think I would say that I'm an axe ending understander. I'm even an axe ending sympathizer. But I don't think it's a stretch to say that these respective scenes for the Field siblings are definitely created differently and meant to evoke different feelings. So, yeah, there you go. That's my feelings on the Field siblings for you. And now it is finally time for the top 3. We are at the very top of the tier list now, and you might be thinking that the title for this section is a bit of an exaggeration. But honestly, I don't think it is. Not when you consider that these 3 are the characters that I haven't been able to stop thinking about ever since I finished the game. And the curious thing about it is that at the very beginning, just going off of first impressions alone, I would have never been able to guess, not in a million years, that this would end up being the case. It's funny to me because it's not the first time that this has happened, and also because by the time my feelings and thoughts on these characters snuck upon me, it was already too late. I was already in too deep. And just the way that, in my opinion, they carry the story of the game and represent some of the hardest hitting themes have provided me with hours upon hours of entertainment just discussing and analyzing them. And I think that pretty much justifies their inclusion up here. So, without further ado, let's get into this tier. I think it's fair to say that Santa is definitely a character that's meant to leave quite a strong first impression on you when you first meet him and the rest of the group. Like, just think about the way his personality is presented to you at first. He's loud, he's brash, he's swearing up a storm every time something happens. And not to mention that he also gets some of the funniest and most memorable lines in the earliest portion of the game. Like, I haven't been able to stop thinking about any of you chums speak Japanese ever since I played the game. Shout out to the localization team for that one, by the way. And his design is doing a great job at conveying the kind of person he's supposed to be. He's got the slick back hair with like the headbands, which I think I mentioned in my own playthrough that is a common character design trope for characters who are supposed to be a bit more delinquent types. So he's definitely conveying that idea that he's young and perhaps a bit of a troublemaker, but maybe he's gonna lean a bit more into the, the delinquent with a heart of gold kind of trope. And yet, I can't say that at the beginning of the game I was that interested in him yet. I think that definitely his design felt a little bit like it was trying too hard to be like, the hot, brooding, edgy kind of guy. And I was a little bit over that, so I was more interested in older characters or characters that I found appealing for other reasons. I am so glad the game proved my first impressions wrong. Santa, or rather Aoi Kurashiki, turned out to be one of the most fascinating characters in this game. And yet, he's also one of the most mysterious ones. And think about it, how many things do you know about who Aoi Kurashiki is? Like, outside of the organization of the second Nonary game, his role as Zero, and more importantly, his relationship to Akane, I don't think we ever get to know anything about him. Or, at the very least, anything not related to his trauma and his loss. What about his interests, his hobbies? What would he have been doing if he hadn't been forced to grow up and literally parent his younger sister, and then being thrown into an even more incomprehensible sort of tragedy that completely uprooted his life? These questions are of course hypothetical. Santa is such a strong character and has such a clear connection to the themes precisely because we don't know. And I gotta say, I'm partial to the kind of characters that are fully devoted to somebody else, and I applaud the decision to make Santa this way, especially when it's such a central part of the plot. And I'm really glad that Santa was the character that he turned out to be. Everything about him, every little detail, from the similarities between his design and Akane's, to the moments where we do get to see his genuine reactions to everything he has suffered, everything he's gone through, the way he talks about the incinerator, the way he talks about the Santa story, everything is so well crafted. And I like that he has moments of weakness, where he admits in the safe ending that he's lost. But I like that he never wavers from his commitment. And he might have doubts. He might question whether he's a good or a bad person. He might question about whether he's the black or white Santa. But regardless of the questions about morality that he asks himself and the audience, I do like what his devotion and love for Akane say about who he is as a person. Not every great story has a villain. Hell, not every great story needs to have one. But in my opinion, a great story that knows how to effectively utilize its villain is a story that can be made so much more compelling and engaging for it. 999 simply wouldn't be the same without the presence of Ace as an antagonistic force. And what a force he is. It's just honestly kind of wild just how integral his actions and everything are to the plot of 999. Not only as part of the second Nonary game as this enormous threat that's behind almost every bad thing that's happening, but also as the enormous threat that's behind every bad thing that happened 9 years ago. Now, my playthrough was a bit unconventional on account of the fact that I got safe ending on my first playthrough. But actually getting that route when I got it made me appreciate his role as a plot twist villain all the more. A common criticism of this type of narrative device is the fact that the villain doesn't really get to have a lot of staying power. They don't get to show their true colors for long enough for us to care or actually think that it's memorable. But with Ace, I feel like the medium of video games, and more specifically, the medium of a video game such as this visual novel with multiple endings, is pretty well utilized, because one of two things can happen. One, either you get safe ending as your second to last route and he goes mask off, and the game still isn't over and there's still plenty of more villainy to discover. Or two, you get safe ending first or pretty early on, and then you still have more game to get through. Therefore, you get to contextualize all of Ace's actions through the lens of this guy's up to no good. And I just think, man, that's such a great way of taking advantage of the strengths of the medium that you chose to tell your story. I do have a bone to pick with the fact that his backstory is not in the game. Now, I can understand why. I don't know where I would put it myself if I were the one writing this game. I think its inclusion would have perhaps made the story a bit too bloated. But on the other hand, the things that Ace has gone through, they don't justify his actions. Of course not. He's a terrible, awful, selfish man. But the layers of complexity that they give to every action that he takes and every reason he might have for chasing after his goal are honestly essential parts of his character to me. Like, his character just can't be fully understood without the additional context that those interviews or Q&As say about who he is. That minor gripe aside, though, everything else about Ace is just incredibly enjoyable and fun to me. I'm the kind of person who's really partial to characters who are active and shape the events of the story via their motivations and actions. And Ace definitely fits that bill. He really embodies that character writing philosophy of making sure that the villain is the one who acts and the hero is the one who reacts. He works great as an antagonistic foil to Akane and Aoi, due to the fact that Hongo is so ruthless and extreme in his methods and ways of understanding the world that it really amplifies the gray morality of the protagonist of the story. And even his character design, I think, subtly signals or hints at the fact that there is a disconnect between him and everybody else. It's a little bit futuristic, not very on the nose futuristic, but definitely in a way that kind of stands out. Definitely memorable though, and functional as well. That trench coat is probably the most plot relevant piece of garment in this game. So yeah, I mean, I could probably go on and on about Hongo, but I'm probably just gonna wrap it up here. And I'm gonna repeat for the last time a sentiment that I think I've made clear very often in my playthrough. Very compelling character. I love to hate him, hate to love him. Xeriscape is the story of a girl so insignificant as to be wronged by a man who sees her as an obstacle on his path to what he wants and quite literally manages to erase her from existence. And Xeriscape is also the story of a girl so powerful as to be able to do the impossible and defy this fate. And these two girls just so happen to be one and the same. And yet, at the same time, they're not. They couldn't be. They can never be. Akane Kurashiki is an unbelievable character. Something that my picks for the top 3 have in common is the fact that they are all characters that manage to subvert my expectations or surprise me in some sort of way. Perhaps because of development for the better or the worse. I don't think this is because I necessarily think that a twist or some sort of surprise is something that defines a great character. There are many great characters that are exactly what it says on the tin, and I count them among some of my favorites. But when you're trying to craft a mystery and a story that's questions upon questions, I think that the characters at the very heart definitely need to play into the strengths of that genre. And no one exemplifies this better than Akane. Probably the most mysterious and the character that we know the least in the entire game, and yet such a central part of everything that's been happening, that when everything finally comes together in the end and you finally get to see the real picture, it actually makes me reconsider if Junpei is the actual protagonist of the game. Because Xeriscape 999 is about Akane Kurashiki. Everything that these characters go through has been orchestrated by her. The setting and genre of the game, of course, allowing Akane to sort of persist in the form of becoming a paradox herself. She's Schrodinger's cat. She's trapped in this state between life and death, unable to really do anything except to close the paradox, to continue making things happen. She must save herself every time, because she already did, and because she did, she always will, and there is no other way out of this for her. And just imagining the toll that something like that could have on a person makes my imagination run wild whenever I think about Akane. I think I mentioned this when I was discussing Ace's character. There is something incredibly appealing to me about the hidden dimension of characters we don't get to see. And Akane really exemplifies that as well, because who even is Akane? We never spend any time with Akane. That's not to say that we don't get glimpses into what Akane could have been or would like to be. She's still a girl that presents herself as charming and unique, and she has a beautiful, weird mind and a sense of humor. And it's just that it's not enough. There are more important things that she has to do, that she has to become. And it's so tragic. It just makes me feel so much. Most we see of her is through flashbacks. We get to see what she was like as a child, and we get to meet her up until the moment she dies or doesn't die in the incinerator. But no matter what the outcome is, that Akane is gone. She's not the same girl again. She can't be. And that just is incredibly fascinating to me. It's not something I would have ever expected back when she first appeared at the staircase on the gigantic, with her beautiful dress, a purple color that perfectly encapsulates that blend of blue and red, the thematic importance of the morphogenetic fields, always there for us to see if we know what we are looking for. But of course, we don't know that's what we're looking for the first time she appears. And I am definitely choosing to, attribute some of my early expectations to the fact that I was not familiar with Uchikoshi's works. I had no idea if he was going to lean into more stereotypical character writing or if there was really something else there for us to discover. I am incredibly pleased that it was the latter. But judging Akane simply based on first appearances and what we think her role in the story is going to be, is the trap that every single other character falls into. And it's not a trap that's been set out of malice, of course not. Akane needs to do this to survive. And just the fact that she's allowed to take these actions that she probably can't forgive herself for, it's just, I really respect that. I have to respect that a female character in a mystery visual novel gets to have this much agency. And so it might be a bit of a bold choice to choose as my favorite character one whose actual true personality we don't get to see. All we get to see in the present day is her carefully curated persona. But on the other hand, it's Akane Kurashiki. I don't think this is a pick that I really have to defend. My impression is that she's almost universally agreed to be one of the highlights of 999, and I enjoy everything about her, even the parts that we don't get to see, the parts that I can only speculate about. If anything, the fact that the evolution of my feelings for her suffer a similar journey to those of Junpei's really accentuates the impact of the story, and that's just good character writing. That's just excellent story and character integration. And man, I wish I had more coherent things to say about Akane. I really wish I understood her better and that I wasn't so afraid to put out my theories and interpretations of her. But unfortunately for me, or maybe luckily depending on your point of view, I know that Akane's story is not over as of 999. I know for a fact that she appears in Zero Time Dilemma. And a little something called genre awareness tells me that if the protagonist, or I should say one of the protagonists, of the first game in a trilogy also appears in the third game, then there is a high likelihood that she is going to be in some capacity in the second game. Now, I have no idea how or why, or even if that's the case with Virtue's Last Reward. I do have my theories, but I'm just excited to see how things play out. And whatever the future has in store for Akane Kurashiki and my understanding of her, I am so excited to get to it. And the same goes for the rest of the franchise. I think that no matter what twists and turns there are waiting for me in the sequels, of which I have heard different opinions regarding their merits, I am beyond excited to get to see for myself. Maybe one day I can finally call myself a fan through and through of this series that so far has made me experience so much joy and meet so many interesting people, friends that I hold very dear to my heart, and has so much more for me, I'm sure of it. And with that, I finally closed the book on this retrospective, a project that I never expected to be so massive and take me so much time when I first started, but I am so glad that I undertook it. I am now ready to move on to Virtue's Last Reward. So if you managed to stay here until the end, and if anything of everything that I have said has resonated with you, I invite you to stick around, let me know what your thoughts are, and hey, maybe I'll get to see you in the next one. Until then, goodbye for now.